Hello and welcome to this episode of the Reset Podcast. I'm your host, Laura Mignell. This is part of my 29 Days of Magic series where I interview an awesome Black woman a day for the entire month of February. Today, I am super excited to have Christina Bryan, who's the chief of staff at a nonprofit, and she's got an incredible life story, and I can't wait for y'all to take a listen. Hey, Christina.
Hey, Laura, I'm super psyched to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I'm so delighted that you'd be able to join. So the way the podcast works is the first question is always the same. Answer is always hilarious. I feel that there'll be no different with you. So, Christina, what was your first job?
Oh, man. My first job, which I suspect will be the same for many, is I worked at McDonald's.
Oh, okay. But what job at McDonald's? Because I've had a few people who McDonald's were their first.
No one's ever asked me that before. I say I work at McDonald's, and that's usually where it's left. But now that you ask me that, I actually volunteered to kind of fill in different parts of the restaurant. So at first, I started off as a cashier in the front, and then I just saw how much fun people were having in the back, and I was like, wait, I want to be in the back. And so I volunteered to go back there and flip burgers because there was just this constant back and forth and joking and I can just hear laughter. And then eventually I looked at the person in the window doing the drive through and I was like, that's kind of cool. I want to do drive through. And so I literally would volunteer to do almost all of the above at McDonald's as much as I could.
Wow. This is surprising because mostly when someone says their first job was at a fast food restaurant, they talk about how much they despised it. You sound like you actually enjoyed it.
I absolutely had the best time. I think part of it is a lot of the folks who worked there were people my age. And so it was almost like an after school program at 14, right? Where I got to meet other 14, 15, 16-year-olds from neighboring schools. And it was just one big hangout. It really didn't feel like work.
I get it. So it was like a fun squad, then I kind of get
It
it.
was.
Okay, what's one secret from a McDonald's recipe that you learned that we don't know?
One secret that I learned, I don't think it's a secret per se, but I think that there were little if there's a specific sandwich that comes with lettuce, try tomato instead, right? So it's not necessarily recipes that I know of, but it's like trying to order things out of the ordinary that is sort of different from however that specific dish is put together. So like for example, ordering a quarter pounder with mac sauce instead of having it on a Big Mac, that sort of thing.
People do that? What
Oh,
kind of
yes, they do.
weirdos do that?
Oh, yes, they do. People will mix and match. And the thing is, I think the competitor, Burger King, was first known for have it your way. But in almost every fast food chain, you can pretty much swap out anything for anything else. And so people used to ask for, oh my God, this was my favorite because it was the grossest. They would ask for a fish fillet with sweet and sour sauce, inside the sandwich. Oh yeah, with the tartar sauce, by the way, not a swap out. It was on top of. Oh yeah,
Oh,
oh yeah. That one, I'm like, it's funny. I can see that one customer who used to come by and order that all the time.
wow, that is a thing. Like
Yeah.
I guess I'm a fast food purist. I love McDonald's, I love Wendy's, I love Burger King for all different reasons. I order different things from each of those fast food places. But I've
Hmm.
never been the type of person to be like, I'm gonna switch the sauces on you. Like I feel like I would just not want to do that to somebody
You
because
can switch the
it's
sauces.
fast food. You get it as it's supposed to come out. Why are you trying to
I'm
customize?
You know what? I think that we're from the era of you just get it the way they've made it, right? And it's good as is. But I think a lot of these fast food chains, and really partly just trying to stay competitive, they're absolutely in the era of customization, of order it the way that you like, sort of thing.
Wow.
Yep.
Okay. I see the point. I see the point. So we go from enjoying our life
Yep.
at McDonald's to becoming a chief of staff at a nonprofit. What was that career journey like?
It was a tumultuous one for sure. I think that, I went through so many different phases of personality types, even, myself going through different roles. Um, from, working as like just like summertime or part-time as a high school student, I went on to college where I did a lot of telethon work, to just like, try to pay for some college bills. So I would call alumni, and I got in trouble a lot because those conversations ended up being kikis and less about me trying to sell any sort of alumni program or trying to get them to donate money. I just got really enthralled in those conversations. I got super curious, especially if I was talking to an alum who like cared and wanted to know more about me, what my major was. And so those would end up being like 30-minute long conversations. And of course, my supervisor's behind me, like, wrap up the call, get the donation, wrap up the call. Once I was out of college, I made the decision to go into the event planning and hospitality industry. And I did that for quite some time, almost over 15 years. So I had been doing that for, Lord God, like a really long time. Eventually, I had two companies that I owned. One was more geared toward like consulting for other event planning businesses, so helping them with their sales strategies, business development, marketing, etc. And the other business was using real estate property that was on the market, but for short-term use. So for pop-up stores, fashion shows, that sort of thing. And things were going well for sure. And I think this is, as I mentioned before, was a transition where I was no longer an employee. I really had to think as a leader, as a sort of, president of the company. Now I have, you know, uh, um, not just like coworkers, but I have employees. Like that relationship was one that I had to learn how to navigate in my like late 20s. And then from there, I just got really burnt out in 2018 and felt like, the event industry just wasn't filling that void anymore. And I wanted to do more social impact, purpose based work. And so started to eventually transition my way into more of the sort of what we call skills based volunteering, where you're using your skill set to help others, either in the nonprofit or small business world, advance themselves and advance their mission. So the pandemic happened. So I was helping folks who had been displaced in their work, update their resume, find new work, explain sort of the gap in their career in terms of maybe time that they had spent at home during the pandemic without being employed. And then from there, I found a nonprofit that was looking for a chief of staff, and it was sort of all the perfect mixes of my experiences, of the different work that I had done. It literally felt like the job description was written for me. So I joined that team and have been there since May of 2021.
Awesome. So, as a fellow event person, I have
Yeah.
to ask,
Yeah.
what was your favorite event of all time?
Oh, I have a few. I have a few. So I'll give you one on the corporate side and one on the personal side. So on the corporate side for me, I'd probably have to say it was Michael Jordan's 30th anniversary of Brand Jordan. Yes, it was star-studded, but not for that reason. For me, it was just, it felt like a gathering of friends who, yes, were all celebrities, but to see them sort of celebrate such a goat, such an icon, to me, it was just like, I don't know, I was just taken aback by how, I don't know, human, if that makes sense. Michael Jordan seemed like he was just beaming and like excited at the time he had just had his twins. And so he was like opening up his phone and like showing anybody who was willing to take a second to look at his phone to show pictures of his twins. And it just felt like I just got the privilege to join in on like somebody's personal family event. Of course, there were, like I said, celebrity performances and things like that, which you don't normally get at a family event, but that event for some reason just felt very human, despite all of the glitz and glamour that was happening. So I'd say that was one of my favorites for sure. And then my favorite wedding was this young couple. She was a Korean model who was engaged to, I believe he was in real estate, but his family was originally from Russia. And she forever had wanted to get married at the Plaza Hotel. Like that was her dream. That's what she's always wanted. And I don't know if you know this, but the Plaza has a huge waiting list. So like you can't call the Plaza today and say I want to get married at the Plaza in 6 months, right? Like there's like a few years waiting list.
Of course.
Somehow somebody canceled, and in I think it was like September, they were like, if you want to get married in December, that's the only date we have available for the next 3 years. And so she decided to take it, and we planned this like cross-cultural wedding that was like half in Korean traditions, half in Russian traditions, all at the plaza in a matter of 3 months. And while that does seem nerve wracking to try to pull something like that off, I think what made this such an enjoyable event for me was the couple. Like they were just so sweet. And they really cared about their individual cultures, but also was so sensitive about making sure that the significant other's culture was also incorporated. So they took their time to educate us. They took their time to go through the traditions with us and why they do a certain thing a certain way. And I got to go with the bride to go shopping for her traditional like Korean dress as well as her Western wedding dress. So it was just like a very, again, heartfelt, very human interaction, which I really appreciated.
Ah, an event person. That's my own heart. It's
Yeah,
always that stuff. Now, as awesome as they always are, what's the thing that you go like, this is gonna kill me from the event side of it? Because that's the other side about events that people don't
that
realize. Like it's so beautiful and glamorous, but one of the things where you're like, how am I ever gonna get through this? And then you did.
100%. I think it's when the client comes to you and they're like, I need something completely out of the box, right? Because with events, whether it's a corporate event or a personal event, they don't want to be like the last person, right? So if it's a wedding they went to, they don't want their cousin's wedding to look like their wedding. They want it to be completely different. If it's a corporate event, right, where their competitors do similar events, they don't want it to be anything like the competitor's event. They need to one up the competitor. And so, where there are unrealistic expectations, but that's sort of your job, right, is to make the unrealistic possible. Those are the ones where I'm like, oh God, okay, I think we're gonna die. I don't know if this is gonna work. The Michael Jordan one was actually an example of that. There was another one where we had to plan an Indian wedding, and with Indian weddings, traditionally in India, they have the groom arrive on a white elephant, right? All things you kind of can't do in New York because one, where are you gonna get a white elephant, and two, the amount of permits you'd have to get and the number of NYPD folks that you'd have to get to sort of close down streets to make this happen just was unrealistic. And so a lot of clients feel like sometimes if you throw money at the problem, then obviously, they should be able to find a solution. But we were able to get through those fairly unscathed, I should say. And it's true, where there's a will, there's a way. And if there's enough budget, usually you're able to find vendors, collaborators, that can work with you to make it as close to possible as you possibly can.
I love that.
Yeah.
So, what's been the transition like from going from, okay, always on crazy with eventing to working in the nonprofit sector? What's probably the one thing that you're like, this is really similar, and also this, I had no idea I was walking into this.
Oh, for sure. I would say the similar part is you think with the critical side of your brain, right? That doesn't change. And so it's almost like a benefit of having come from the events industry, having had that experience, to be able to now take that to problem solving on the nonprofit side. I think the thing that's definitely different is exactly what you just like hit on the nail, which is you're not crazy running from one thing to the next, running from one thing to the next. You have time to be purposeful. So that word purpose has a very different meaning, right? In the sense that when you're doing events, you are trying to be creative. You are trying to, again, show the client that you have these out of the box ideas and execute on things that may seem, relatively impossible in terms of what they want. But on the nonprofit side, you're almost dealing with not the impossible, but like, let's be honest, world peace, like that's a tough thing to accomplish, right? Like many people have tried and are still trying, and world peace is still this monumental concept that no singular person is able to accomplish. And so in the nonprofit world, where when you talk about being impact driven, when you talk about, social impact, corporate social responsibility, those sorts of things, you do have, hopefully you have the space to be purposeful, to move with purpose, to think about what is the intended result? How can we move differently? Who are we leaving out of these conversations in a way that you really don't get to do on the event side?
Interesting.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. And like, so you're at this like critical, really unique moment, and you've done all this really amazing, fantastic work. What do you think you'd tell 18-year-old Christina?
Oh my goodness. I try to talk to her often. Um, I think the biggest thing is make mistakes. I think my biggest fear up until probably when I left the events industry in 2018 was the fear of failure. And that really prevented me from, I mean, certainly someone who's willing to quit their job and open their own business, you're definitely a courageous person. But I think there's an aspect of me that was afraid to fail. And so in those cases, I feel like I did miss out on certain opportunities just to try different things. And so, I would probably say advice to 18-year-old Christina is I know you're scared, but do it anyway.
To do it.
Yeah, just do it. Just do it. It may not turn out the way that you want it to be. I've suffered for a long time with, not just imposter syndrome, but perfectionism, right? Where if it's not exactly the way I pictured it, then it's just not good enough. So it's kind of like, releasing some of that, and just like getting dirty with it, just trying it out, even if it doesn't turn out exactly the way you planned.
I think that's a key part about it, like getting dirty with it, where it's like, yeah, it is not going to be clean and simple
Yep.
ever. Like,
Yep.
please stop. And I think this is the only thing that I love when folks talk about, oh, how Gen Z is like, they just get it and they're unapologetic. And I'm like, yeah, but they also kind of think it's easy.
They do. They do. And but
And
see,
that,
I
like, and
think that
you're not gonna scuff your knee, you're not gonna bash your head, you're not gonna scrape your elbow. Like, you are gonna walk away from some scars,
that's
and
right.
and
That's right.
kind of
And I think
necessary.
Well, and I think Gen Zers too, in some respect, are okay with getting scuffed up a bit, right? Because I think that there are certain guardrails that they have that, let's say, we didn't have. And so I think we were probably more risk averse in our generation than Gen Z, for obvious reasons. Just again, resources were different, guardrails were different, protection was different. And so I think that sometimes Gen Zers are a little bit more willing to take certain risks, but so long as those guardrails are there. And I think that sometimes life, just as you said, the guardrails sometimes aren't there, right? And it still requires that you do something daring.
Yeah, it's just like, I think it's like, we want you to go out there and try, but I
Mm-hmm.
also want you to go out there and fail.
Yep. Yep. That's a big part of it.
And I think that's the biggest part that I think is really important, that like, yes, you can be totally unapologetic, but I do think it is really important that failing is okay, because you didn't
Mm-hmm.
lose, you learned.
That's right.
Uh,
And I think, but where does that come from, right? I think that the acceptance of failure and the not being afraid of that big F word comes from home, right? Like it comes from seeing your parents and how did they deal with failure? Seeing the generation that came before you and how do they deal with failure? And if they're sort of reticent, and don't want to try things or are afraid of failure, then naturally that behavior is going to get passed on to you as well.
yeah, I think what happens is sometimes, I've seen this with like, with younger folks who come past my door and working with us, where it's like, they were a little protected from, losing, from
Yep.
failing. And
Yep.
so then when something goes wrong, they have no ability to be like, okay, I'll pick myself up and dust myself off, or mom and dad will fix that for me.
That's
And
right.
it's like, that's not in the workplace. What's wrong with you?
That's
I'm
right.
like,
That's right. There is no mommy and daddy in corporate.
don't call them. What do you want me to do? Um,
Exactly.
and I think it's really important for folks to understand that it's not the end of the world either.
Mhm.
Like,
Mhm.
it's expected that you're gonna have a challenging time, and that things are gonna make you go, oh damn, I wish I did that differently. And that's
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, and sometimes you do feel like it's the end of the world, right? Sometimes that's just the kind of anxiety failure gives you, right? And I think in those moments it's important to, as someone who has gone through failure, right? And it was very hard for me because again, I wasn't taught how to fail. Right? Failure was definitely something I was raised to think is absolutely bad. If you fail, it means like your life
How
is
could
over.
you? Yeah.
Exactly. How could you, right? And for me, I think what was helpful was documenting what was happening throughout the entire process so that when I came out on the other side of it, I was able to read through the documentation to say, I see what was going on here. I can see the sort of mental jiggering that was happening. And now that I'm on the other side of it, I kind of see some common denominators so that when this happens again, when something doesn't work out the way that I plan on it working out, or when I do fail, I can now see where I can tweak the process so that I'm less afraid to fail and I know how to get back up faster.
Yeah, I think that's the key part about all of this is that you don't want to fail, so fail, so that you just don't get back up. It is that, like,
Right.
when I say this sucks, ew, it's terrible, but now I'm gonna get back up.
That's right.
And it might take me a little bit slower the first time, then the second time gets a little bit faster, and it's the third time you don't even knock me down, you just sort of knock me back a little bit, and then
Yeah,
the
I
fourth
might
time it's
lose
like,
my
oh,
footing.
yeah.
Yeah. Yep, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. And that lesson learned, yes, it's helpful to hear it from other people, but what I know about me when I was in that period of time where I was like, this sucks, I don't know how I'm gonna get through this, it feels like the end of the world. When folks would say to me like, trust me, this is good, trust me, you have to fail before you succeed, or you got to go through it to get through it, you can't go above it, like those words, I understood them as words, right? But they did
Hmm.
not resonate for me. And I think what's important in getting back up faster is you are your best advisor when it comes to how you fail and how you get up, which is why it's so important to document that process as it's happening, because you can go back to it and say, okay, I see where the turning point was for me. I see where I was able to kind of like, pick myself up by my britches and move on. That how do I get to that next time? How do I get there faster?
It's true. It just a really is a process. It's learning. And also I think the big part about it also is giving yourself grace. Because,
Yes.
like,
Oh
can
my God, yes.
yes, you can go cry in a corner about this. It was bad. I like please go and do that.
Yes.
Um, give
That
yourself
part.
the grace to have that moment is so necessary.
That part. For sure. For sure. Oh, I could
So,
talk about failure for a long time, by the way.
well, and I thought, and I read up, and I thought you probably would have lots of great advice on this because, like, I think it's funny, like, if you work at events, like, because you are literally your job is to be in a tightrope at all times,
Mm-hmm.
and then
Mm-hmm.
which means invariably you will fall off that tightrope.
A
So
100%.
event people more than anybody else understand failure in a much more unique way, and I haven't had this conversation yet on 29 Days of Magic, and I was hoping that we would get to this because I thought that you would have a really delightful perspective, and of course you do.
Aw.
So I really appreciate that.
It's my
Um,
pleasure. It's my pleasure. And again, I kind of, I'd like to usher folks through that dark time, especially for people who, again, weren't taught how to fail or were told that failure was absolutely the end of their lives, right? So, like, it's important for me, as having been given that message and that message having been socialized throughout my entire life, to just like try to usher other folks out of that darkness that, like, yeah, you're not, this isn't going to resonate, trust me, because it's coming from someone else, but like in the meantime, here are the different phases of failure, and so where you're at now makes perfect sense. If you don't want to get out of bed, that's perfectly acceptable. Give yourself some grace.
Please do. Just do it. It's
Yeah,
100%. It's part of the whole living thing. You got to give yourself some grace.
that's right.
And speaking about giving yourself some grace and giving yourself some time, what do
Yep.
you do for your self-care?
Well, that's a great question. It changes. I get bored easily. So like I went through a phase where I used to draw a lot. So I would, I've got a huge box of pencils and paint and canvases. So I would paint and draw. And then eventually I kind of just got tired and bored of it. So I put the paint away. Nowadays I'd probably say it for me it's trash TV. Like that's where I'm at. Unapologetically, it's trash TV. Listen, I'm in New York. It's cold out. There's not much I can do outside these days. And so for me, it's like finding the most dramatic, show that I can get my hands on. Real Housewives always fills that void for me.
Of
Um,
course. Which are your
yeah.
housewives? Which are your housewives?
I watch a few. So I watch Potomac,
Of course.
Atlanta. Atlanta's
Of
my
course.
favorite, and New
Of
Jersey.
course.
Those are my top three.
I'm right there with you. I
Yep.
am a Potomac in Atlanta. I loved New York, but last season was trash on trash.
I heard that.
Like they had to rip up the entire series because it was such a bad season.
How do you mess that up?
Horrible casting. Like, I, I don't know if I can say it publicly as to why, but basically,
Yeah, yeah.
it's basically one of those things where it's like
Like, why is this working on the
they
show?
added a character that didn't fit,
Oh no, that's the
and
worst.
I think the thing with that New York situation was, and it's actually interesting because it is one of those things where it's about failure and such, is that if you know the game, get a player who understands the game.
That's right.
And they got someone who they thought they could just sort of drop into the middle of that, and that would work. I think it's a unique story because they finally added a black female character, and it just didn't fit, and it unearthed
Mm,
a lot of different challenges with that season, and I was like, there are plenty of black women who would have fit that crew better.
much better. Yeah, I see what you're saying. It's almost like, and I mean, I'm just gonna come out and say it. Tokenism doesn't always work, right? Like
No,
just because you're throwing in that one black person in there doesn't mean the chemistry's gonna work itself out, right? Whereas I actually forgot one that I watched, Salt Lake City. I felt like, so the cast was predominantly white when they first began, and there was two people of color, one black woman, and I was like, oh, this works. This works, right? I think somebody, by the way, who gets this right in terms of like writing, putting in the right characters together is Mona Scott Young. I'm not a huge fan of the Love
God,
and Hip
those
Hop.
shows. Oh God.
I know. I don't watch Love and Hip Hop as much as I used to. It's definitely lost its luster for me, but that woman knows how to select a cast and put a cast together.
Well, it's interesting because I think as event people, we know that like curation is what we do.
Yes,
Like, and we are part. I always say that event people are part psychologist, cultural anthropologist, and cult leader
yep, yep.
because we have to create something that you didn't know about before, convince you to come, and then get you to stay, and then tell your friends about it.
Very accurate.
And so that is part being like that's how I think you can really be able to curate differently. And that's why I would say, like, if you ever need someone to do any job, find an event producer because
That's right.
like you have
That's
all of
right.
those skills. You understand people, you understand deadlines, you understand quick thinking, and
Project
you also understand
management.
people. You also
Yes.
understand people.
Mm-hmm.
Because like you can figure out what sprinkles of crazy you can put in a room and it will work versus a lot of other people. And like, yeah, you're right, Melissa Young, she that
She got
definitely,
it.
but also who did she pick for being Love and Hip Hop? Cardi B.
Yep.
Like,
And look where she's at now.
so like she could spot a gem.
Yeah.
And there is something very unique about having that talent and skill. And with Housewives, I was like, damn,
They missed it.
y'all
They missed
missed
the
that
mark.
one.
Yeah, they
Like,
missed the mark. They missed the mark. Well,
um,
that's too bad. And
yeah.
certainly Andy Cohen has so many of these franchises. I'm sure he'll figure it out.
Oh, sure. And I've
I'm
watched the Son
sure.
of Potomac and it's been a mess. So there you
A
go.
mess. Girl. Oh my gosh.
Robin, I think, needs to be fired, but that's needed.
Like, what is happening with her?
How are you gonna sell out? How are you gonna leave out the most important storyline and add it to your Patreon, which
The
you're gonna pay
entire
$5?
season.
You're $5 a subscriber for your Patreon when you literally getting paid tens of thousands of dollars to be on the show. Like, girl,
Andy called her out on it. I definitely appreciated him. He was on Watch What Happened
because he
Live.
was mad.
Yeah, he's like, so how does this work exactly? Yeah. I mean, listen, for me, I just think that there is definitely a certain type of character who goes on a Real Housewives, show, and it is about the paper at the end of the day. They're not doing this because they're like, for some philanthropic reason. Like it's about the paper. Like they probably have other businesses or other things going on that they also want to promote. And if you know who they are from the show, it's a lot easier for them to promote their album or to promote their candle or to promote their podcast or whatever else they're working on. So it's to be expected.
Yeah, it's always fascinating to me. I'm like, wow, y'all
Mhm.
is crazy.
I know. I know.
And so, last question for you.
Yeah.
Do you have a give or an ask of the audience?
Um, I not necessarily an ask per se. I think I probably more have a give more than anything else.
Go
But
for it.
there are a couple things I'm working on. So certainly, I think as those start to develop, folks will see a little bit more of that on my social page. I'm actually working on a book about failure. So hence why I said I can talk about this forever. Um, and I think my give though to folks that are listening today is a rule that I came up with years ago when I decided to leave the events industry. And part of it was more about what are my personal values? Like, what is important to me? What do I value? And how does that show up in every relationship, every job that I look for, every friendship that I have? Like, how does that show up in my day to day life? And one of the things that I came up with was it's okay again to prioritize being successful. It's absolutely okay to want better for yourself, to not want to struggle financially, to want the finer things in life. Like those are all things I also want for myself. But one of the promises I made myself was I will not engage in any partnerships or friendships with anyone who prioritizes money, wealth, and or status over passion, service to others, and kindness. That is a rule for me. And it doesn't mean that you don't value those other things, right? That you don't value money, wealth, and status, but that those things don't come first. That what you value first is being good to others, is being in service to others. And in doing so, you are then successful at what you do and you're able to build your wealth that way. So that's just a little give for the audience.
I think it's a wonderful give, and I think that that is how you end up becoming successful in whatever you do by
Yep,
holding fast to like roles like that, where it's like it is not always about the money. And
it's
if
not.
and if the folks around you are acting that way, then it'll eventually blow up in your face.
That's right. Because really, I think that money, the chase of money on its own isn't life sustaining. However, if you are trying to create a product, for example, that is a solution to a need, and you're like, listen, I had this need one day and I found that there were no products and no solution on the market, so I decided to create it. That is a form of passion. You're going to be successful. That's also a form of passion, right? And so the money just becomes the icing on top.
Just like licensing.
That's right.
Such a wonderful, good, amazing advice. Oh, Christina, as a fellow event person, I could talk to you for hours.
Same
Because I'm
here.
sure
Same
we
here.
have.
This is way more fun than I thought.
You were such a delight. We're gonna put all of your details in the show notes so folks can follow you and see what awesome things you have upcoming. And
Amazing.
I can't wait to see what you have in store for us. But thank you so much for being part of 29 Days of Magic.
It's absolutely my pleasure. And for me, I always say I'm a Black woman champion, so I'm here for it.
Awesome. Thank you so very much. And that is our